everyone. Thank you very much, AngularAthens, for inviting me. I'm so sorry that I could not be there in person. It was due to I was a bit worried because I hadn't gotten my third vaccine shot, and it's all this coronavirus thing that's making things so complicated. I really hope that in the next version of AngularApp, I get to be there in person. If I submit a talk and you want me there, that is. So I really like the fact that I can see the audience. It's been so long since I gave a talk and I could see the actual audience and see the feedback of the people. So that's something that's cool. Let me start sharing my screen. Wait. Let me move Zoom to my other screen, and I'll start the presentation. Wait. No. I'll start sharing my screen first. Wait, share screen, and I'll share desktop one. Can you all see my screen and my presentation? Yes, okay, I see the thumbs up in the audience. That's great. Okay, so today we'll talk about how to build a design system with Angular, of course, Nx, and Storybook. So let's see. So I'm Katerina. I'm a core member of the Nx team. I'm also a Google developer expert for Angular, Google Maps, and web technologies. I'm also the AngularAthens meetup co-founder, and I'm also a speaker, an instructor, and a cat person. And also this is me on top of Mount Olympus because I also climb mountains. And you can follow me on Twitter at cyber.city or find all the information you need at my website, psyber.city. And if we're lucky, during the presentation, one of my cats will come here and you will see it. So, the agenda for today is, we're going to explain some core concepts. I mean, what is a design system, which many of you may know, but we'll do a brief overview. We'll see what Storybook is, we'll see what Nx is, and why one would want to use Nx and Storybook to build design systems. And also we'll see some demos around generators, migrators, the Nx console, and a small conclusion in the end, of course. So let's see first, what really is a design system? Brock Frost has this great definition that I like. A design system is the official story of how your organization designs and builds digital products. Essentially, it's a set of styles, rules, and reusable components that an organization or an application uses. So you may think that it's like a catalog of UI elements. Almost. I would say that think of material design. I'm sure that if not all of you, most of you have browsed through the material design of Google, right? And there you will find some rules about the spaces and the shadows and whatever else. And you will find some ready-made components like buttons, links, which you can reuse. So this is a design system, right? So think of it like that. Let's see what Storybook is now. What is Storybook? It's an open source tool for developing UI components in isolation. What does that mean though? So let's think of a scenario first of all before I go into exactly what Storybook is. Think that you're creating a very complex website with registration that users have a form that they have to register their data in, and they also have to put their, credit card data inside. Like think of a very long form with many steps and validations and complex validations and everything. And you want to see, and you're developing this form, and right, maybe it's a bit complicated to test it, and you want to change the styles of a specific button or a specific toggle on the third page of that validation form after the user has put in their data, they have put in their address, they have put in their credit card details, and each step they have to validate, of course, and make sure that data is correct, and you want to change the styles of the toggle on the third page of that form. So normally you would have to go through the flow, or you would either have to write some mock data or some mock way to bypass the validation each time if you wanted to test it locally, or you would have to go through the validation each time, or you would have to go to do some extra work in order to be able to go straight to that third page whenever you refresh to change the styles of the toggle, right? And as I think of it, it's a headache. What if you could take this toggle out of there, have it somewhere differently in some other space, and only serve this toggle locally where you can change the styles and adjust the styles each time in order to see how it changes? Well, Storybook does exactly this. It lets you develop a component in isolation. It lets you take the toggle and serve it separately locally in a separate page. And you can change the styles and adjust some fields and see the styles changing instantly, for example. And we'll see what I mean. So Storybook, what it does, it lets you create a story for a component. A story is actually a definition of what you want your component to show. So if you had a toggle, your toggle story would be, I want the toggle to be enabled, to be of color red, and when you change it to turn green, for example. It makes you create a scenario. You use the component in a story, describing use case scenarios like the one I said, various states of a component. So a different scenario would be if you wanted to see that toggle tested otherwise to be disabled, and when it's disabled, be gray, for example. And then to share the results, the collection of stories, and what it is a storybook, which serves like a catalog of the available elements and the state of elements. So a storybook actually is a collection of all the stories of all these different states of the components that you're using. So let's see an example. So now, wait, I'll show you the example. Come on. So this is the Storybook website, and in the Storybook website, they have a list of live storybooks. And the great thing is that you can publish the storybook online. So the Storybook application UI has its own storybook that is running. So if you build a storybook for your app, let me zoom in. You will see that you will have a list of all the available components, and if you click on one of these, let's find something nice, you will see that you can see individual labels, for example, that you can change, and here are some fields that you can change, which we're going to see especially in the demos. So here is a list of all these things. If we see the buttons, for example, you see here it has a list of all the buttons, and you would be able to change. If I had access to this, I would be able to change the colors and see all the buttons differently, but it lets you actually test out the components in isolation, like test these buttons in isolation, just like they are. Let's continue with the presentation. Where's the presentation? Wait. Okay. So the cool things about Storybook are that you can develop entire UIs without needing to start up a complex dev stack. Like, remember the example I gave you before, in order to test that toggle in the third page of this registration form, you don't have every time to start up your server and start up your whatever to do the validations and everything. You can just develop the entire UI without needing to start everything again. You can just start your storybook and see that in isolation. Also, it can serve as a documentation for your UI library or system. Like we saw before, how the storybook design system looks like, and the storybook looks like. We could just see the documentation of, oh, they have these buttons, and they have these buttons in different states, and they have these links and everything. So it can really serve as a handy catalog, I guess. You can easily also browse and trigger different states, and you will see what I mean by that in our demo. Also, it integrates with most front-end frameworks like React, Angular, which we'll see today, Vue, and Svelte. So essentially, the syntax does not change much between the different frameworks, and it's very handy. Also, it integrates with Cypress for UAT tests, because I guess when I was explaining write a different scenario to go through a different path, testing a component, I'm sure to most of you, it may have sounded like an E2E test. The cool thing is that the fact that it integrates with Cypress lets you reuse your component stories in order to run Cypress E2E tests, which we will see during the NX demo that we'll see, which is very handy because you don't have to write things twice. You don't have to write your test twice. You just write the storybook and some stories with some scenarios, then you pass them into Cypress, and it uses these stories to test your components. As I said, write less tests, rely on your stories. So how does it work? The way it works is you just add a story file right next to your component file. You import your components in that story, and then you draft out scenarios. And I'm sure it sounds like an E2E test to you. So let's see what it would look like. You just add a story file .stories.ts right next to your component file. You put your component draft no scenarios. So if you see, for some reason I cannot point with my mouse now, but if you see, for example, that you have an Angular component file, the myButton component, you see that we have myButton.ts, and above it we have .spec.ts, .html.ts, and .stories.ts. So you have to add it there. Also, if you see at the top of this list, there is a .storybook folder, where inside we have some configurations, which are very lightweight and they don't need much. I mean, you can just use the out-of-the-box ones, which we will see what they are. So if my custom button component looks like this, I just have 3 inputs. It's a DOM component. I have 3 inputs, one for the label, one for whether my button is disabled or not, and one for the background color. And my template accordingly would look like this. It would take a disabled value, it would take an ng style for the background color, and it would also take the label. What would our story look like? Our story would look like this. You would export your myButton component, which you have imported, and then you would create a template. Inside that template, the story template, you would say that it's of type myButton component. So you would add myButton component in the story, and then you would pass the arguments. The arguments are essentially the inputs that the button takes, right? So the variable there that says primary is the first story. And in the first story, we pass in the arguments that we want to show when we serve that story. Then you can add a secondary and add different values in label, disabled, background color, and etc. But in the primary, you just add some values there. And let's see what it would look like with the values click me, disabled, false, and background color magenta. It would look like this. So when we serve it, our storybook would look like this. It would have the button, as we said, that is of background color magenta. It is enabled, and it says click me. Now, you see down there that it has controls and it has some fields that you can edit. The controls are these arguments that we see here, which are editable on the fly, and we'll see now in a very short demo. So I can actually go there and in the label, change the text that it says, switch the toggle, and also change the background color, and it would look like that. I change the label to hello there, I change the disabled to true, so now it's disabled, the background color now is yellow, and if you look at the URL, maybe it's very small, if you look at the URL, all these different values that we added in the arguments are recorded in the URL. So in the URL, if you cannot see, it says disabled equals true, background color equals yellow, and it should also say the text. So what does this help us in? It helps us, of course, in E2E tests, right? Because in our E2E test, in our Cypress, we say that go to this URL with these arguments, create this new component, and then the E2E test extracts the canvas from here, which is just an iframe, a different iframe, and it goes and checks inside the new iframe if whatever we have matches what we expect to do. So this is the way the E2E tests work and Cypress works on top of Storybook. Finally, you can build and publish your Storybook. Wait, I have to see the time as well. I just remembered. Finally, you can build and publish your Storybook as we saw. What is Nx? Nx is a suite of powerful, extensible dev tools to help you architect, test, and build at any scale, integrating seamlessly with modern technologies and libraries, while providing a robust CLI, caching, dependency management, and more. Thank you, Katerina. We did not understand anything. So, let me explain. Nx provides generators. I'm sure, I hope, all of you, since you're at an Angular conference, have worked with the Angular CLI and you're familiar with schematics and code generation. Nx provides code generation, which helps you architect your workspace and generate code. It also provides executors. Again, if you're familiar with Angular CLI, you have some executors to build, test, link, and in general, automate tasks. You also have migrators, which help you upgrade easily with using generators and executors. So if you do Nx migrate from one version to the other, Nx will go and change your code and adjust your workspace to match the latest version. So it's essentially painlessly upgrading to your versions and always making sure you're up to date with what latest versions of the technologies you use. Also, Nx gives you a big number of plugins. It integrates with modern tools like ESLint, Cypress, Prettier, and of course, Storybook, which we see today. So it gives you seamless integration with all these tools. What another thing that it does, which is something unique and amazing for Nx, it does computation caching and code base analysis. So you end up never building or testing the same code twice. What does that mean? It means that first it caches your code, and then whenever you run the same task again, it fetches the results from the cache. But how does it do that? It makes sure with code-based analysis to analyze your code base and understand which parts of your code base have changed. So if nothing has changed, it will fetch results from the cache. If some things only have changed, it will fetch things from the cache from the things that have not changed and always rebuild or retest the changed parts of the code. So essentially, never do the same task on the same code twice. Also, it provides distributed CI, incremental builds, CI integration, Nx Cloud, and much more. I won't go deep into these because you can find these on our website, and you can also find these on dedicated talks about this, because if I started talking about each one of them, it would take the whole talk. But so why one would use Nx and Storybook for design systems? So the amazing thing about Nx is it will create stories for you. What does that mean? It means that when we saw the My Button component, for example, for Angular, it has some inputs. So Nx will go, it will analyze your Angular code component, extract the inputs, and add them in the story. So it will create stories for you, which means that, and it will also generate the default Storybook configuration for you, which means that even if you don't know anything about Storybook, you can just run a command, Nx generate Storybook configuration, and it will take care of everything. It will set up Storybook for you, it will create stories for you, and then all you have to do is do Nx Storybook and your project name to run it. So you don't need to write any code at all initially. If you want to go deeper, of course, and add your custom things, you will need to write code, but it will set up everything for you, even if you don't know how to use Storybook. So it's amazing for that, I believe. Also, it will let you manage Storybook through the Nx ecosystem, which means that whatever you do in Storybook, And where everything you change will be added through the distributed cache and the code analysis. As I said, it cache results, use cache to fetch them. And it will also generate E3 tests for your stories. Remember what I said about Cypress? Well, when you run the generator or the schematic for storybook configuration, it will generate a new E3 application inside which it will import your stories with the URLs that we set for the arguments, and then you can just run the E3 tests initially. And so out of the box, you have storybook configuration, created stories, and E3 tests without writing one line of code. What's more, Nx provides integrated environment for all your commands. So Storybook has the CLI as well, but if you're using Nx, you don't have to go into the trouble of learning how to use the Storybook CLI from scratch. You can just use the Nx CLI because it's an integrated environment and you don't have to remember many commands. Also, we have the Nx console, which is a graphical user interface for the Nx CLI, which makes things just clicking buttons. Also, it provides seamless instant integration with your CI. It provides you the power of computation, tasking, and code-based analysis for your builds and tests. And we also provide active maintenance and support. We're working very closely with the Storybook core team. Each new feature they have, they ping us, and each thing we want to fix or change, we ping them. So it's a continuous back and forth. And now Storybook also uses Nx for their code base. So you can see how this relationship really brings things together. So how does one use it? If you have an Nx workspace, you can do yarn adds in the dev dependencies Narwhal Storybook. And if you have an Angular application, you can just do nxg Narwhal Angular Storybook configuration and your app name, and it will create the Storybook configuration for you. Just what I said there. So what this will do is Nx will install the required dependencies of the Storybook packages. It will set up the necessary scripts to run and build Storybook in your Angular JSON, in your application file, in your project JSON. Also, it will add the default Storybook configuration, and it will generate stories for your components. So let's see some demos now. Let me close this and let me start. Wait. Here. So actually, no, let me put this here. Doesn't matter. Wait. So now I'll show you the Nx workspace I've been talking about for so much time. So here is our Nx workspace, right? We have applications, libraries, and I have one library, my UI library, and in my library I have one custom button that we showed, which is this one here, which is exactly what we saw, and the button stories. And I also have a link which has some different inputs. It also has a number. So my stories, as you can see again, I pass some things like this. And in my package JSON, while I was running all these install Storybook scripts, it also added the Storybook add-on essentials, Storybook Angular, and the Webpack 5 configuration. So now, if I go to my Nx console, which is a plugin for VS Code, which you should add if you're developing with Nx. You can see here that I have my projects. And if I go in my UI project and run the Storybook task, and I click, what it will do is it will do ng-run UI Storybook, or this can be written Nx Storybook UI. It's the same thing. So this will go and run Storybook for us. And let's see how it will look. So now Storybook 6.3 started in our local host 4400. So if I click here, you can see what we saw before. Let's make this bigger. I have this button and I have these changes here. So if I go here and change this and change this and change my color like this, you see the button changing colors. Now, if I go to my other component, the link component, you can see that Storybook automatically analyzes the type of input that we have. So here, it knew that true false was a boolean, of course, so it added a toggle. This is a text, so it adds a text, but here, the text size, it knows it's a number, so we can change it from this. And this, you can see in here that we can actually change the values of the component without needing to revise any code or without needing to restart anything. We can just use this, and we can see that this UI library that we created only has 2 components, so we can easily browse the catalog of components in that library, right? So since I don't have much more time, but I have shown you almost everything I wanted to show you. Right. Play. Yes. So we saw the generators and the migrators, and we also saw the console. So let's wrap up. So first one, Storybook helps you publish your design system, right? As you saw before, we have a couple of components. We can publish this as a live URL, build it and publish a live URL, and share it with our team or whoever else we want. Also, Storybook helps us quickly test out various states and scenarios in isolation. Nx helps you use Storybook by integrating it with its full system. And Nx helps you use Storybook by generating stories for you, migrating your code, and much more. We didn't talk about migrators, but I briefly talked about the Nx migrate command. But in the Storybook package of Nx, you can see, or I can also post a link where you can find everything you need. Also, Nx helps you scale up with executors and generators. Nx helps you integrate Storybook into your pipelines. And the Nx team is in sync with Storybook team to address issues in time and plan forward for new features. This list of links you may need, you can take a picture now, or I can post it later on my Twitter. And yes, that's it. Thank you very much. Let me see this.